I noticed some of you looking at my shirt, but it fits the theme. This is about history, and this is my historical shirt. And so my keeper tried to throw it away when she thought I wasn't looking the other day, but I was looking. So I got to save my historical shirt. So we're very fortunate to have this venue from the Northern Kittitas Historical Society, headed up by Charlene and Michael and the board. But if you're, I'm a member. I think I'm a life member. If I'm not, I should be. But if you're not a member, I'd encourage you to join. It's a great way to help preserve the history of especially the Upper County. So keep that in mind. Also, I wanted to mention, if you see this on the newsstand, this little publication, there was a story of the last presentation in here, which was about the Roslyn, or what the Upper County was like during the Prohibition days. Anyway, one of the so this, I use the term farms and ranching interchangeably, so just keep that in mind. So this is what the topic's about today, and why am I chosen to present this? Okay, is beyond me, but anyway, Michael and Charlene asked me to do it, and I do have a little bit of history with the Teanaway and the grazing. But let's keep in mind that when the Intermountain West was settled back from the 1850s, up until 1900 or so, the three driving things were livestock, timber, and mining. Just about all of our early settlement was driven by those three areas, and they weren't conflicting issues. They weren't conflicting land issues. In fact, they were complementary, because the livestock people needed the timber ground, the higher ground, for summer grazing. They had their farms in the valleys where they could grow hay for their winter, but then they needed the summer grazing, and that was the timberland. The timberland was also important from the mining aspect, because the mines had to build houses for the miners, and they needed the timbers for the mine props. In fact, maybe you guys remember Art Scott. Art Scott was a Cle Elum. He grew up here in Cle Elum. He went to Cle Elum School, and I knew Art very, very well, but he used to relate stories of when he was a teenager of cutting timbers, I guess they were timbers, for the mines, and I think he referred to the number 3 mine and maybe the number 9 mine. But anyway, that was across the river on the where he had a summer job cutting timber. So these were complementary land uses. So this was throughout the Intermountain West. There's no question about that in my mind. So there's no doubt this was typical of early Upper Kittitas County. And the Teanaway Forest, which we're going to talk about here, has a long history of livestock grazing dating back to settlement. And I think it's pertinent at this time to talk about what the land ownership pattern looked like. Hi, Laren. From the mid 1800s, mid to late 1800s, up through about 1980, over 100 years. And so on this map, I'm going to point those out to you. I know you can't see them, but you only have to remember 4 colors. One is the government land, and that's the green. That's the national forest. The other, and the dark blue, is the state land. The gray over here was railroad grant. Okay, so we've covered two. We've covered the government land and the railroad grant. And then the orange was timber company. And this orange happens to be Cascade Lumber Company. And they came into ownership in our area in the early 1900s. In fact, about 1900 is when Cascade Lumber Company appeared. And besides that, then all the white was other private. In other words, those were either homesteaded or they bought them from the railroad, originally railroad grants. So that's the private land, and those were the farms or the stockmen where they had their headquarters. And the dark blue here is state land. This light blue here, that was orange. This is the Tainum. This is the Orientia. Here's Cleom here. This is the Teanaway. This is the Swauk. Every other section in the Swauk was orange also. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But anyway, so it's those categories of ownership that were predominant from about 1900 up through about 1980. A good 100 years or plus. So anyway, that's relevant. So the stock ranches, as I said, were either down here in the Kittitas Valley or in the Upper County. They were in this white here, and then they used the orange and the green for summer grazing. So anyway, that's kind of the which one is it, Charlene? That one. Okay. So the forest land was summer grazing for these stockmen, and this was a key part of their year-round feed source. They had the valleys to grow their winter feed, their winter hay for winter, and then they had the kind of the in-between for spring and fall, and then the in this case the orange, what we're going to talk about today, the orange, which was Cascade Lumber Company, for their summer grazing. So so let's start with beginning from Lauderdale and talk about the ranches or the farms from Lauderdale westward and on up to Teanaway. So just to orient you again, this is 970. This is Highway 10. Cleom's right here, and Lauderdale is right here. So and then this is the main fork of the Teanaway. And so all this in red here was the orange on that map. This is Cascade Lumber Company, and even this is Cascade Lumber Company. We'll talk about those. So this is Lauderdale. This is First Creek here. This was Cascade Lumber Company. So beginning from Lauderdale, let's go westerly, and the first one to mention is the Burke Ranch, which was here at, I call it First Creek, but it's actually Lauderdale. The Burkes were right here. And then as we move westerly across Swauk Prairie, and this is Swauk Prairie up here, we have 3 or 4 main ranches or farms. The first one we would come to as we go up the Swauk Prairie Road off of 970, that's right here. You come to the Michaeletto Road. So the Michaeletto Ranch was right in here. And that later became Harwood. And then as we go west, we come to Hartman. The Hartman Ranch was right in here. And that would be primarily north of the Swauk Prairie Road, but they also had ownership south of the Swauk Prairie Road, south of the Swauk Prairie Road in here. And then right, their neighbor was Hanson, Lila and John Hanson. Is that right, Jim, your dad? Yeah, and Jim and Sue are here. They still operate this ranch here. That's where the buffalo are. And then the next one going westerly would be Ballard. And so just to orient you, here's the Lay Road here, okay? Again, here's the Swauk Prairie Road. And so Ballard is in here. And this is the main drainage through Ballard was Night Creek, and that's this one here. And actually, Night Creek actually headed up on the Hartman place. But anyway, Night Creek and this was Ballard. There was a pretty good sized ranch in there. Okay, so save your questions till the last, please. Otherwise, I'll get mixed up. So before we go on up to Teanaway, let's drop south of 970. Again, this is 970. This is 97. This is Lauderdale here. Can you guys see it okay? This is Lauderdale here. And so now south of 970 on the Squaw Prairie, we still have a little bit of Hanson in here. And then Pinkert. Pinkert was on the, if you drive up the Hidden Valley Road today, you'll see all those houses and stuff on your left as you drive up. That was the Pinkert Ranch. And then also, if you go south of the Pinkert Ranch into on the Hidden Valley Road, which turns into the Emmerich Road, you have the Emmerich Ranch in here. That was, I didn't know them. I knew Mike Emmerich. I didn't know his brother, who was very colorful. And then I've heard stories about him. Have you heard stories about his brother? Okay. So anyway, there's a little bit of Ballard south of 970 also, just in the vicinity of where the Hidden Valley Road takes off of 970. And then also in the Squaw, this is the Squaw drainage here. Goes all the way down and comes into Yakima River. Goes all the way up here to Blewett Pass, and it's got its tributaries. But it's interesting, note from Lauderdale to the mouth of the Squaw, there was only 3 ranches. There was the Burke, Crabtree, which later turned into Coe, and then the Davis Ranch at the bottom, down here. Davis Ranch was a cattle ranch, and that was around 3,500 acres. They're long gone, but the land is still intact. That ranch is still intact. So it was, it's interesting that in the Squaw itself, there's only those 3 ranches. So going back up north of 970 then, and moving westerly. But wait, let's go up, let's take a side trip up the Red Bridge Road, because that's also, you know, drains into the Teanaway. The Red Bridge itself is right here, okay? And then the first ranch to the, going that direction was Cooper, and then Roy Thomas, Gerald Thomas's brother, and then Blackburn. Now there may be some other smaller ownerships in there. This is, again, the Red Bridge Road going like that. But primarily just those 3 ranches there on the Red Bridge Road before its juncture with the Masterson Road, which would be right about here. Okay, so it's interesting to note that if you've traveled that road for very many years, you'll notice that there's an old ditch line above it, and that was the Masterson ditch, and it had its intake just upstream from the bridge. If you go across the bridge and you see those cables hanging off the rock there, that had to do with the flume that started the water out of the Teanaway into the Masterson ditch. And there's still remnants of the ditch. Of course, the Mastersons had a very early water right. She's not here, so I can't do it, but it's around 1886. And so this is the Masterson Ranch in here, and they had their own summer grazing. They did not have any. They had a little bit of Cascade Lumber Company leases, but mostly they had their own timberland, and this is all Masterson now, even to this day. Harry Masterson passed away, I want to say about 2012, around in there, okay? And he was the son of Bat Masterson, whose dad homesteaded that ranch in the 1880s. Okay? About. So anyway, that takes care of the water that came out of the Teanaway and the ranches that were irrigated here. and this again is Masterson. This again, we're going back onto the orange. This is Cascade Lumber Company. It was, it might have had cattle on it at one time, but mostly it was sheep. And it was sheep from the early to mid 1900s up through about 1970, and that was Martinez sheep. Martinez is one of the few, if not the only, sheep outfit left in central Washington, and they use this this side of the orange for their route to their Forest Service allotments up in the West Fork. So anyway, so then moving on up to Teanaway, the first ranch, of course. Now we're going to move up to Teanaway just to orient you again. This is 970, and this is the Teanaway going this way. This is Night Creek, I mentioned earlier, comes through Ballard. Ballard had a sawmill right here. In fact, the pond is still there. That ranch is still fairly well intact. And then Gerald Thomas's ranch in here is still fairly intact. So the next one we want to talk about is Schober, and that's where the brick house is, which is right there, where the Red Bridge Road joins the Teanaway Road. The brick house would be right about there. And that house was built, and I knew Keith, so I'm pretty accurate on this, if Mark isn't here. That's Mark Schober, Jess's son. There was, that was Peterson originally. Peterson built the brick house about 1913. And then Frank Schober married into that family and took over that ranch. And he had two sons, Jess and Keith, which most of us know about. Jess passed away quite a few years ago. Keith passed away in 2020. And he was married to Geraldine Cooper. Again, the Cooper Ranch was right here. And they went to school at the SWAC. The SWAC Grange Hall was originally a school. You all know that. That was the SWAC schoolhouse. That's right there. So anyway, moving up the Teanaway, the Schober Ranch was the first one, and then we come to. Well, let me make a correction here. This sometime was referred to as Musser Creek here. It's actually Mack Creek, M-A-C-K, and that's the creek that went up through Gerald Thomas's place, which is now Mack Creek Ranch, owned by the Wyckoff family, Martha Wyckoff. And then, so going on up the Teanaway, you see all inside this red line here, there should be the white on that map. These were all other private, and this was all Cascade, where they got their summer grazing. So most of these families had a few cows, and they weren't cattlemen in the sense that they made their living raising cattle, but because most of them worked out. But anyway, they had a few cows. They had a little hay field, little pasture for spring and fall, but they leased their summer grazing from Cascade on this side of the river. And so it's Cascade again came into ownership about 1900, and they began their formal grazing leases about 1920. Prior to that, it was just first come, first serve, you might say. Anyway, so the ones moving up to Teanaway then were this is Mack Creek. Oh, it'd be right here. This is Musser Creek. This is Musser Creek. And that Danko place is right there. That later became Downs. Is she here? Jerry Downs. You all know Jerry. Anyway, she's the heir, and that place is now sold. So is Downs, Danko, and then Corolla. Corolla was, this is Mason Creek here, okay? uh, that was also part, the ownership kind of transitioned from Danko into Corolla in here, and then up Mason Creek was this quarter section here, and that was the camp place. Want to mention that because that was well known for its still during Prohibition days. Keith can tell you about that if he was here. So anyway, the next one up then would be Engstrom. Einer Engstrom, I don't remember her.
Inez.
Huh?
Inez.
Inez, yeah. Who said that? Oh, geez, we got Joe Cromartie back there. He can correct me if I'm wrong. That's Joe. We'll get to him in a minute. So anyway, that was Engstrom. And then the next one up would be Crusetto, which would be right in here. This creek here doesn't have a name as far as I know. But John Crusetto, I think he had a meat market in Cle Elum. Joe?
He had the red and white products, C&C Grocery was Crusetto and Crusetti, and then he managed the Royal Company store.
Okay. Good, thank you. But anyway, Crusetto's really neat family. Used to stop there and she'd always have cookies for you, coffee and cookies. But anyway, that place sold not too long ago, and the state bought it. I don't know why, but the state had to have it.
That's what they
And
do.
so they bought the Crusetto place. And then south of the river, I don't want to forget to mention, because Orso's, they were in here someplace, and this is known as Orso Canyon, right here. Okay. Have I got that right, Laren? Orso. No, this is Orso Canyon. This is Orso Canyon. This is just an unnamed tributary. This is Orso Canyon. Again, everything south of the Tanaway, all the way up Clelum Ridge, was sheep grazing. Martinez on their way to their sheep allotment on the National Forest. So westerly, up past Dingbat, the next slide will show Dingbat up there, but this is Camp 17, and this is Carlson Canyon, and then the yeah, I got them all. So anyway, the grazing ranchers in the Tanaway, primarily in the North Fork and the Middle Fork, they were Sanders, Smithson, Tom Smith, Kohler, and there was some dual use with sheep and cattle up through, almost up through the 60s, 1960s. The sheep, this is Story Creek, by the way. This is, I'll get to that in a minute, Joe. The sheep unloaded at a place called the Henry Place, and that was right at the mouth of Indian Creek. And we'll point that out here in a minute. Let's see. I want to point out the Henry Place. So I'll come back to those slides in a minute. But the Henry Place is a very historical place. Okay, so here we are. Here's Story Creek, Dickey Creek, Middle Creek, Indian Creek, and Jack Creek. So the Henry Place was right here, and this is Shirk Canyon right here. So the Henry Place was right, and this is the North Fork. This light blue line here is the North Fork of the Tanaway, right? And all this uncolored was Cascade Lumber Company. That would be the orange on that map. So the sheep outfits unloaded there at the Henry Place, and this would be up through about the early 1960s, okay? At that time, most of the North Fork was leased, the Cascade Lumber Company property in the North Fork was leased to Jess Peterson, which later became Schober. In about in the 1940s. I'll just say 1940s. No Schober here. And the Schober family had this. They would run they run mostly cows and calves, but in the last Jeff Schober switched to yearlings. They had a Forest Service allotment up here. This is Stafford Creek, by the way. So Frank Schober had that was Keith and Jess's dad, had a Forest Service allotment up Stafford Creek and Stand Up Creek, and he had a cabin right there where Jungle Creek and the North Fork come together. You might remember that log cabin. Jess's son, Mark, moved that cabin to his place down here, which was good because it was on company land. Okay, so it's worth noting that in the 1950s, Cascade Lumber Company was in the cattle business too. They were not only in the timber business, they were in the cattle business, and they ran their 150 pair, about 125 to 150 cows and calves on the North Fork, also in conjunction with the Schober family, and they had it fenced off. It was really interesting. So that was in the 1950s, and they ran their stock with the Schobers up until about 1962. That's when I came here. But then they trucked them up there from Yakima Valley. They had a wintering place down at Terrace Heights. So anyway, Sam Kaiser succeeded the Schober lease on this in the North Fork, and that was about 1995. That was after I left the company. So there was 25,000 acres in this, plus 2,000 or 3,000 acres of state land. 25,000 acres of company land and 2,000 or 3,000 acres of state land that was in this North Fork unit. So anyway, Sam Kaiser from the valley, Kittitas Valley, succeeded the Schober grazing in the North Fork. Sam is no longer there. He's succeeded by a rancher by the name of Kyler Beard, B-E-A-R-D, and I do not know them. Okay. So this is it's worth noting that not all of the Cascade Lumber Company land was timbered. They had quite a bit of irrigated land, and the irrigated land was referred to as a contrato place. It was a homestead. It wasn't railroad grant, and but the company in the early to mid 1900s, they bought some ranches that had hayland in the North Fork, and this was the contrato place, and they wanted that hayland they needed that hayland for their it was horse logging at that time, so they needed hay for the horses in their logging operation. So that was contrato, and it's still known as the contrato place. I guess this is a time to mention that all of the Cascade Lumber Company, all that orange, is now state. Like it or not, it's all government. They're still leasing it for grazing, but it's government land, state land, referred to, as we all know, as the Teanaway Community Forest, which is probably a good thing. Okay. But anyway, they didn't. Well, there was another owner between Cascade Lumber Company and the state, which was about 2012, is when the state bought it from the timber company, and there was two other owners after Cascade Lumber Company before the state bought it in 2012, and I won't get into the weeds on that, but anyway, this pasture or hayland, it's used as pasture now, but originally it was used as hayland for the draft horses used in the logging. That was a contrado place. This one here is a Bozzoli place, which also came into Cascade ownership around 1910 or so, and this is just about, this is in the North Fork, and it's just about even with Lick Creek, if you know where Lick Creek is. Okay, just across the road from the mouth of Lick Creek is a set of corrals there, and that's where the current lessee unloads and loads out. They truck the cows in and out, and that's where they unload. So that's the gated pipe. What you're looking at there in the white is gated pipe for irrigation, which was replaced the original gravity ditches. These places have a very early water right. Contrado, Bozzoli, and Hanson and Indian Creek, which we'll talk about in a minute, had a very early water right, and the water physically was transported out of the North Fork by ditches, gravity. There were gravity systems. The Henry place had a gravity system, and those all switched to pumps. You know, you had to utilize the water right in order to keep it, you know, in modern days. So the owners, after Cascade Lumber Company, put in pumps and pumped the water out of the river, not into the ditches, but into gated pipe, and that's what these white things are, gated pipe. You know what I mean? So anyway, we can talk about it if you don't. And so, so we've already talked about those. These ones here, again, Story Creek, Middle Creek. No, what's the next one above Story Creek? Dickey Creek, then Middle Creek, and then Indian Creek, and then Jack Creek. And on this side it was Shirk Canyon and Rye Creek. Again, the Henry place was right here, right there, and that was a gravity system also. Very good water right. Anyway, and then, so going up Indian Creek, we got another homestead that the Cascade Lumber Company bought out, and that was the Hanson place. And that had a good water right out of Indian Creek. That was a gravity system. And the Hanson, Keith knew that family very well, and he had a couple of interesting stories to tell about, and I shouldn't tell this one, but I will. He said the Hanson, Ole Hanson, some of you might recognize, they've been gone a long time, but anyway, they didn't like banks. So the story is, and this is right from Keith, that they kept their money in quart jars or cans and buried under a stump or something, somewhere up there. And then whatever caused, well, when the Hansons sold out to Cascade Lumber Company, something happened in the family. I can't remember what Keith said about it, but anyway, the myth is that the money's still there, buried under a stump. And Keith was very adamant about that story. He says, it is still there. And I said, well, where do you think it is? And he said, well, it would be either under the sill log, and this is Keith talking, either under a sill log of the barn, or a sill log of the cabin, or under a stump. And so, so this is the Hanson place up Indian Creek, and there's the barn. There's the barn, and this picture was taken by somebody you probably know. What year was that picture taken? about 1970. Well, it even says on there. You're not supposed to see that. But anyway, that barn is gone. But I took that picture in 1970. And so, but I've never been back with a metal detector, darn it. But again, that's the story of Indian Creek. And the predecessor to Cascade Lumber Company replaced the gravity irrigation system out of Indian Creek with gated pipe because it was too, it just made more sense to keep it in the water in a pipe than in a ditch. So these are Sam Kaiser's cattle up Indian Creek. There's a gate on that road now, has been for years, so I don't know how you get back up there without, walking. It's about a mile and a half from the North Fork Road up Indian Creek, so it's not a bad hike. And I have a rough idea of where the cabin was or the house was, and I have a rough idea of what stumps to look around with a metal detector, but I've never done it, and I probably never will. Anyway, so let's move over. This is again to orient you. This is the North Fork, and then here's Caslin. Right here is Caslin. Anybody not know what Caslin means? Okay, well I'll explain it to you in a bit. On this side, Camp 17 and Carlson. Anyway, Caslin is right there. So Bible Rock is right there, and I'll explain that in a minute. So, but what's interesting about Camp 17 is, anybody remember Camp Illahee? Yeah, you remember Camp Illahee. Camp Illahee was right here at the mouth of Carlson Canyon. That was the scout leader's name. What's his name?
Bresco. It's like Bresco.
Huh?
It's like Bresco.
Bresco.
Bresco. It's like Bresco. John Bresco. Yeah.
John Bresco. Yeah, John Bresco was the scout leader.
His name's
And
like-
he was instrumental in maintaining Camp Illahee as a scout camp. And that was right here at the mouth of Carlson Canyon. That went out of business about in the early 1980s because the state put them out of business because the water supply didn't meet standards. So Camp Illahee, which was a lot of people in the upper county that are still here, probably went to Camp Illahee. But anyway, that was right here. And then Bible Rock, which I'll show you in a minute, was right about here. That was Bible Rock right there. The Camp 17 was a railroad logging camp. I haven't talked about that yet. But anyway, Cascade Lumber Company had a logging railroad, all the way from the mouth of the Swak, that's where it tied on into the Northern Pacific, no, not the mouth of the Swak, it tied into the Northern Pacific at on the Bugney place. On the Bugney place is where it tied into the Northern Pacific. Anyway, it's standard gauge, and it went all the way up the Teanaway up to Caslin. Caslin was right here, and that was a company town, and that was the headquarters for all of the logging that took place in the Teanaway up through from early 1900s up through about 1934 or 5. And that fellow by the name of Eugene Henderson put that history together in this book. And I don't know if you can still get them or not, but they used to be available at the Tribune office. So this is called the Pine Tree Express, the history of the Cascade Lumber Company's Pine Hauling Railroad in Kittitas County, 1916 to 1946. He's done very interesting. So I'm not going to get into weeds on Caslin, except just to mention it, because that was an important part of the culture, if you will, of the Teanaway up until the mid-40s. I'll just say the mid-40s, okay? When they pretty much took the old growth off here. That railroad took the logs from here by railroad to Yakima. The mill was in Yakima. Okay, most of you probably know that. Anyway, Camp 17 was on this side of the river. Again, this is Carlson. Camp 17 was on this side of the river, and it had a railroad to it on this side of the river. I was never able to figure out how that railroad spur up this side of the river got across the river. And I asked the early people in Cascade Lumber Company, where was that crossing at? I've asked Keith Schober where it was at. Nobody knows where that crossing is, because if you drive up the Teanaway and look across the river, it's just a high bank there. There was no logical place for a crossing, but yet there was a railroad here. You can find the grade. The grade is there, all the way down to Camp 17. And that was a logging camp. But anyway, a little bit of railroad trivia there for you. But anyway, this was then the Middle Fork, and the main ranches on the Middle Fork was Bozzoli here, I think it was Gussetti, one or the other. And then as you go on up the Middle Fork, this is all Middle Fork, up to the end of the county road, and that was Chikalinsky. And Chikalinsky, his name is Andrew. A lot of you probably remember him. He passed away, of course, but not very recently. But anyway, they were related. Chikalinsky and Fudas were related. So they had summer grazing from Cascade in this area, okay? And they're still in business. They're the only ones of the original, I'll say original, from the early, I won't say when, I'll say from the 50s. No, even before the 50s. Because Gary and Ted Fudas are still here. I mean, they're still running. They're the only commercial livestock outfit in Upper County now, still. They're the only ones that I know of that have year-round livestock. You know, they're out on Airport Road, Fudas family. And anyway, they truck up here. There are 40 or 50 pairs. They truck up here, unload here at Dickey Creek, and then drive over here to their lease land from from the state now, was Cascade. But anyway, so this is Fudas here. This was a hay patch. They had a good water right also. This 320 acres, and that was Chikalinsky, but Chikalinsky and Fudas are related, and it's in Fudas now. And that's, as I say, Ted Fudas. Some people call him Larry. I call him Ted. He lives down here on the 3rd Street, just across from about where that horse pasture is. Okay, so anyway, that's pretty much the players that are there. And the only one that's still there, as I'll repeat, is the Fudas, these guys here, Fudas family, from the beginning. And they're at least 3rd generation. So anyway, I showed you a picture of Bible Rock. Location of Bible Rock is right here. And anybody doesn't know why it's called Bible Rock is because the rock itself is opened up like a Bible. You know, if the trees weren't blocking it, you'd see it from the North Fork, and that's why it's always been known as Bible Rock. Anyway, so there's a picture of the Middle Fork and the North Fork. Oh my God, 1966. That's don't do the math, but I did take that picture. So this is Mount Stewart back here, and this is 1966. Over 100 years of commercial, industrial forest land. And this is the way it looked when the state bought it. And it had to be saved, so the state bought it. So that was the North Fork and Middle Fork, and this is the West Fork. This is that Foodaz pasture right down here, just looking up the West Fork. So Yellow Hill would be back in here, one of these back in here. This is also 1966. Well,
Who's counting?
so anyway, this is kind of, how am I doing on time? Am I okay, Michael?
You're fine.
15 minutes.
Huh?
15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, so as I said earlier, livestock grazing is compatible with a healthy forest ecosystem. You know, people talk about overgrazing. That's the human's fault that the livestock overgrazes. It's not the animal's fault. It's just they're not managed. So anyway, it's a compatible use with managing a forest for trees. Grazing is just part of the picture. I won't get into the weeds. Some people want to ask, well, how do you determine how many cows to turn out on your summer pasture? How do you figure that out? Well, probably in the early days, I'll say early meaning mid 1800s, it was trial and error. And probably came pretty close to balancing the forage for summer, winter, and spring and fall in each guy's herd. I partially grew up on a cow-calf outfit in Wasco County, Oregon, and I asked my grandpa one time, well, how do you know how many head to turn out on our piece of rangeland? He said, well, it depends on how many head we got winter feed for. So his gauge was, if I had hay for 100 head, 6 months out of the year, 3 or 4 months out of the year, well then I can turn out 100 head. And well, that didn't make too much sense to me. So as I grew up, I finally figured out that there ought to be a better way to do that. And so I got on my horse and followed those cows around for part of the summer and figured out that this isn't working. We were overgrazing the summer range in spite of how much hay we had. So anyway, I decided, I better go to Oregon State and get educated in this. And so I did, and that's how I got into forestry. So a lot of people say, well, how does that work out? Worked out pretty good. I didn't want to be a logger anyway. Yeah. So anyway, there is and I'm not going to get into weeds on this, but anyway, we figure carrying capacity, the unit is acres per AUM. And an AUM, animal stands for animal unit month. And an animal unit month is equivalent to a cow and a calf grazing or eating for 1 month. And that cow and a calf, and it varies depending on the weight between them, is 1,000 pounds, and they will eat, or she will eat, 800 pounds of air dry forage per month. So that's so an AUM requires 800 pounds of forage per month. And then from that we can, believe it or not, go out on our rangeland and determine how much forage we have available. You don't want to take it all. And from that, calculate how many AUMs we got. So anyway, Uh, so, just a little bit of reminiscing here. Caslin, as I said earlier, was the company town at the railhead from Cascade Lumber Company. There was a school there, and this is it. This is 1922. I did not take this picture. that picture is in this book, or in this book. Okay, you guys can come up and look at this later. But anyway, that's the way it looked in 1922. I actually knew some. Well, you guys probably did too. Knew people that went to that Caslin schoolhouse. Roy does for sure. And then that was the office and the company store and warehouse. This was at Caslin. This is the office. And this was the company store, and this is the way it looked in 1922. And those buildings were. Well, does anybody remember Bible Rock Camp? Roy does. Anyway, there was some houses here, and the company leased those houses out to a church group, and they had a church camp there. It's called Bible Rock Camp. There was about 6 houses, company houses that were leased out, and that stayed in effect up until about 1980 something. And again, the state came down on them for their water supply. It wasn't, good enough. So the Bible Rock Camp moved out, and then they actually used this building too as a bunkhouse. But anyway, so then the company had to get rid of the buildings. So the buildings were demolished by fire about mid-80s. I'll say mid-80s. Okay. So anyway. I want in that regard, in the November 2019 issue of the Tribune, there was a picture I just showed you, a picture taken in 1987, and then a picture taken just a couple years ago. I was able to locate these trees and retake that picture. So anyway, if you want to look at that, anyway, you want to argue about ownership, you can fact check me here. I've got a 1930 Metzger and a 1956 Metzger.
Oh my
So
God.
if you're curious about who owned your land before you did, you can look it up there. And then there's some pictures here of the Teanaway Logging Railroad, Teanaway Forest. Anyway, so I think that's it, Charlene.
Great.
Questions?
Phil,
Maybe answers?
do you know anything about the grave that's up in Sugar Creek?
You're gonna have to repeat it.
There's that grave up Shirk.
Shirk Canyon, yeah. Shirk Canyon, Debbie just reminded me, I forgot to mention that up Shirk Canyon, there is a grave, it's still there. That was David Shirk, and I think that was his name. Gravestone's still there, yep.
And that was a Shirk he had a homestead up there? I just wondered what the history was.
Well, yes, the Shirk family had a homestead there, bought out by Cascade Lumber in the early 1900s. Yeah, interesting. Thanks for bringing that up, Debbie. I would have forgot that. Yes,
You were gonna talk about the swamp, about the railroad going up the swamp.
I didn't talk about that.
Right, you kind of mentioned it, but you said you'd come back to it. You don't have to. It was very interesting.
Yeah, because that'd be off topic for today, but anyway,
Okay.
we
Another time then.
not only had a railroad up the Teanaway, we also had a railroad up the Swamp. Every other section in this township was orange. And the company built a railroad up there to harvest the timber. And that was in the 40s. The only person that I know, everybody that worked on that railroad, I think is gone. And I think Keith Schober was the last one. He said he worked on the spur up Blue Creek when he was a teenager. So all those people are gone. But the main line went up to Swauk with standard gauge, and then there was a spur line up every draw to log, to bring the logs out of the woods. You bring the logs from the landing to the mill. The logs out of the woods came by horse. Well, by that time they had cats, so they used the logs from stump to landing was cats, dozers, tractors. Yeah, good point. Now after the Swauk, then, now again it's off topic, but they had all this light blue was orange. That was orange, and so they had that'd be to Tanum. So they also had, after the Swauk, they had a railroad up to Tanum, and then that was orange. Cascade got it from Yakima Sheep Company. I don't know how Yakima Sheep Company got it, but it was railroad grant land. Yakima Sheep Company got it, and then, had lots of timber. So Cascade bought it and built that railroad up there. They sold it to, they sold the Tanum to an outfit on the west side, and then they sold it to the state, and it's now called L.T. Murray Wildlife Areas. So that's all. So if you want to add up all the orange that Cascade Lumber Company had at one time, if I pulled that map out, you'd see some more orange. Well over 100,000 acres at one time.
Was the main reason for Cascade selling because of logging or water? What was their main reason for selling off?
Well, Judy asked a very political question. The mills in Yakima, have I got time?
Yes.
Okay.
3
The mi-
minutes.
the Cascade Lumber Company had 3 mills in Yakima. You remember that mill complex? That wasn't just one mill, that was 3 mills. It required 170 million board feet a year. Their company land would provide about 1/3 of it. The other 2/3 had to be purchased from somewhere else, and that seller was government, Forest Service or state. Well, in '89, as you know, the spotted owl was listed as an endangered species, and that shut down the timber sale program. So 100 million feet went away for that mill complex. So they said, well, we can't run this mill on 50 million a feet. That's what their own land provided. So we're history. It's sad. Yes, Charlie.
In the late 1800s, there was a town called Teanaway City, and I'm curious where that was located.
Teanaway City was right where Highway 10 and 970. It's just down, where Bugnes is. It was just down Highway 10. Right in there was that's where Teanaway City was. And in the beginning, that was there before Cleellum,
Yeah.
Teanaway City, and the post office, and it was on the railroad. So it was settled first, built up. No remnants there that I know of. But anyway, that is now Bugny. Most of it is Bugny. I should mention that, in the early days, let's say early meaning from mid-1800s to mid-1920s, there was a lot of mills in the upper county. Now you can't even begin to count how many mills there was. The last one I can remember that was operating was Ballard. Ballard on the Ballard Hill Road, right in here. So Ballard's had a mill, but there was a dozen of them. Not all at the same time, but over a period of time, there was lots of mills, because as the country was being settled and built up, lumber was in demand, and you couldn't transport those logs 100 miles, like you do today. And the mill had to go to where the timber was to make the lumber, and it would mill would stay there. There was even one up in, by Sky Meadows. It was, Buffalo Springs. There was a sawmill there. So the sawmill would stay there until, they didn't have any more old growth, and then it would move, or close and move. So there's lots of mills. The last one here was, Miller and Short, right over here where, Shoemaker is now. And then, well, second to last one, then Fooey. Where Maccabees is now.
Oh, Bator.
Bator was the last one. Local.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And take a stop by the donation box.
Oh, yeah,
Insist
okay,
on
just real
donations.
quick.
Okay.
Charlie, did you finish?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we have, Maria, come on up.
You
Maria
want-
Adams has an announcement to make. She's with the, Heritage Club, and I just wanna let everyone know, we've got applications on the table back there. There's a great newsletter that we put out every quarter that you guys can grab a copy of. And there's some really good, this, publication, 1883, they did a really good job of covering, our presentation last month, and, it's just, we have extra copies of that as well. Want to give Phil a nice round of applause? And don't forget to, leave a bunch of money in the donation. So we can pay our $11,000 Maria, go ahead and give your announcement.
Just a couple quick things. September 30th at the Masons Hall in Roslyn, 5 to 7, is a public meeting for input on the new signs that are going to go along the Coal Mines Trail. So we are asking, we really want to engage people, find out if are we missing something, are there some stories that you know about that we can include and those kind of things. They're going to be really cool. And then the next night on the October 1st, the Ronald Community Club is we're working with them for our October meeting. It's going to be at the old Ronald School. They're going to be a quick tour, and then they're doing a presentation, and it will be really fun. They're doing local sausages, like from Kirk's and Guando's. And it will be like a fundraiser for them because they take care of the old Ronald School and Hawthorne Hall. So if you haven't had a chance to go in the building and see what they have set up in the classroom, it's a great opportunity to do that because it's super cool. And they'll have some of the students that were back in Ronald telling some stories. So that's it. Thanks.